If I was to ask most people here, right, we could all assume that well-educated means you've had a degree in some sort, you're well-read. But that's the assumption that what comes with the idea of being well-educated is that you are someone of prominence, social prominence, right? And you are someone that deserves a bit of attention. Oh, it comes with prestige. But the education is only in the academic sense. But there's so much more to life, which is what you're alluding to. There's more to the human being or the human experience that could go with being well educated, but that's lacking it's lacking in the education system.
Correct. So if you look at levels of education, and thanks for your interpretation, you've got basic literacy, which is where education starts. So you learn how to read and write, you learn basic arithmetic, that's basic literacy. Then from there you can have skills development, academic education, professional education. And for vast majority of people, that's where they stop. So then you have financial education, which is an incredibly important part, which is what I was alluding to, right? And then you have emotional education, understanding, having self-awareness, social awareness, understanding emotional regulation, understanding relationship management. And then you have, from there, personal development education. I mean, to your point, so imagine I have a degree, a master's degree, and I have a prominent position in the top of corporate, but I don't know anything about myself. I don't know what my purpose in life is, my passion in life is, what my values are. Imagine I don't know what my strengths are, and I don't know my zone of genius, and I don't have any goals other than the ones that I have inherited through societal conditioning. Would you still consider me, now that you know that, would you still consider me to be wise and aware? No, because I know how to carry out a task, but I don't know anything about myself. I haven't even asked the questions. So I'm incompetent, but I'm unaware of my incompetence. So I have a huge blind spot there. So the question is, if I don't know anything about myself, I don't know my purpose in life, and I don't know my passion in life, and I don't know my values in life, I don't know what my strengths are, I don't know what my zone of genius is, and I don't have any goals, how did I make decisions about my career? That's the question. I was influenced by society, cultural conditioning or parental conditioning to pick the type of education that I picked. And even the choice of occupation was externally driven instead of being internally driven. Right? So where do I sit on the self-awareness scale? Where do I sit? I have an education. I'm very good at carrying out a task. Even that's debatable, by the way, because we know a lot of people at the top of corporate and government, they're not necessarily, I mean, how many of you work for corporate managers and you've gone, I can do a better job than this person, right? Even that is not an assurance of excellence. But the question is, can we consider ourselves to be educated if all we have done is we've learned a lot about very little? And then all the critical areas around emotional management, relationship management, and let's not even talk about spirituality because the world is not ready for that yet. But the reality is, without consciousness and spirituality, we are just not able to tap into our creative faculties, we cannot tap into our intuitive faculties, and the vast majority of people don't even know what spirituality is. They automatically make the assumption it's religious indoctrination. They don't understand that the human condition is not just a mind and a body. We're a mind, body, heart, and spirit, but very few people even understand that and refuse to acknowledge it. Right? And there's so many scientific studies now that are actually validating the fact that we are so much more complex than we are. But you look at the entire work system and how it rewards us. The work system that we have in the world right now is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution, and it rewards you for your mental and physical exertion. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that you have other dimensions to you. So you can go from birth to death without ever realizing that you're actually quite a creative and imaginative being, and you have incredible intuitive faculties, but you dismiss it as this is esoteric, this is spiritual bullshit, this is not something I want to know, and you can literally go to your grave without ever understanding what you could have done with your life. So that's a real waste of human potential.
I think the debate's still open of consciousness and who we really are because of the anomalous experiences that we have, right? We have these cases where people are experiencing things that are beyond explanation, or say reductive materialist explanations, right? And so it keeps the debate open. It says, well, what about this? One case of, say, weird, mysterious, abstract, spiritual experience, that alone brings question to who you are. You can say we have some model of society and the human being, but how do you explain that thing there? What just happened just there? Where someone was able to do something that was beyond explanation, right? And those keep happening, which just suggests we might not be able to explain them, but it just suggests there's something more to us. And are you saying that's what's missing from the education system, that we're not exploring these anomalous things? Or
my concern is that people who are at the top of academia, professional and government are too quick to dismiss anything that doesn't fit in with their narrative. At the whole point of education, the word education comes from the word educo, which is to draw from within. And we are so reliant on external information to drive our decisions that we dismiss everything. So I have never written a book on something like this. I mean, I have studied brainwashing, and I can tell you, I can identify all the techniques that the media uses or anyone uses to manipulate minds. The fastest way to control minds is to control information. In case you're wondering, how do you control people's mind? And there are only 3 steps to indoctrinating anybody. They're very simple. Number 1, repeat the message over and over and over again. Now, anywhere you see this, you should be on alert. Second, create a negative emotion in the receiver, typically a feeling of fear. And for anyone that understands personal development or has done any study in psychology, one of the fastest ways you can reprogram a person is by instilling fear. So any fear-based message that's being repeated often over and over again, you can potentially look at that and go, there is a potential attempt to brainwash me. And the third step to indoctrinating somebody is to make sure that the message is endorsed by people of authority. And that's where I think the more educated you are academically and professionally, the more vulnerable you are to accepting that message because it's come from people of authority, the experts, right? So there is no critical thinking there. So what does critical thinking mean? We hear the word critical thinking over and over again. The word critical thinking means looking at a piece of information without your beliefs, without your biases, and without feelings. How many of us can do that? How many of us can look at a piece of information through an objective lens, without feelings, without biases, and without beliefs? And that's true education, that's true awareness, and that's true consciousness. And I'll tell you why I'm even talking about this. After studying the human condition, I'm absolutely convinced humans are incredibly powerful and incredibly creative. But there is a negative correlation between how many years you have spent in institutions and how creative you are, generally speaking. The more years you spend in educational institutions, the less creative you are. Right? That's why a lot of employees will not come up with new systems and processes or innovate or disrupt or invent or discover. They will follow a protocol or system. That's how they feel most comfortable. That's fine. There's a place for it, but it's actually not good for the individual because the individual is putting a lid on their psychological and spiritual growth. That's the issue. So the creativity is not taught. A majority of people are happy to settle for something where somebody else is calling the shots, never realizing how enterprising and how creative they can be, because that fear is what gets them settling for less. So that's how, for me, the brainwashing kind of iterates to personal development training that I've done as well. So I didn't write this to attack professionals. I mean, keeping in mind, I have been a professional myself. I spent 22 years in financial services, working for the top banks and the #1 investment, the largest investment firm in the world. I knew I can see my own indoctrination now. And one of the things I started to ask myself before I started to sit down with clients and did wealth management plans, how do I know what I'm telling them is the truth? Universities have told me this, but they have a curated curriculum. Corporates have told me this, and investment companies have given me all this data, but how do I know this is true? Is it possible, perhaps, that everything is heavily curated and there is a system? I just asked myself the question, right? So I developed what I call the test of truth. Anytime you hear an opinion or you hear any type of narrative, how do you know it's the truth? Well, I'll tell you what's not the truth. Just because a lot of people believe it and doing it, that doesn't mean it's the truth. Throughout history, we have seen the majority tend to be wrong. So how you identify, if you come across any piece of information, first thing you've got to ask yourself is, before I accept this, before I adopt this, before I integrate this into my behaviors, before I believe this, how do I know it's the truth? Just because the media is saying it, just because it's expert opinion, just because a lot of people believe it? Well, that's typically not the way you identify the truth. First, when I come across the piece of information, the first thing I ask myself is there logical consistency in this information? So let me give you an example of this. I was told a lot of things by university and corporates around how to do financial plans for clients. But I needed to validate that and make sure that there are people, wealthy people, who have applied these same things and have been able to create wealth. So I started to look for evidence of people who are not part of a vested group to see if they've achieved the same outcomes from the information that I'm preaching to my clients. Second, I look for empirical evidence. Is there actual empirical evidence for what I'm being told? Just because it's coming from universities, just because it's coming from corporate, just because it's got expert opinion behind it, I still want to make sure to perform my duty in the best way possible, I want to make sure that there's sufficient empirical evidence. Third, I look for universality of application. What that means is, does this information work the same for everybody? And then fourth, I question myself and say, are there any organized groups that have a vested interest in pushing this information out? The more vested interest there is, the more there are organized groups behind the information, the higher the probability that the information is not based on the truth, that there is mental manipulation going on, right? So for me, it's just about being highly aware. I want to make independent decisions. I want to be an independent and autonomous thinker. I believe I'm a sovereign being. I don't like any attempts to control my mind, so I can make independent decisions. So I'm questioning everything now. As you can imagine, it's not a great place to be, by the way, because in many cases, ignorance is bliss. You don't have this stress. You can just easily just hang out with your friends, have a few drinks, and have a nice meals. So you get to this point and you can't turn this thing off because you go, where does this end? Because it's like going down a rabbit hole. But I guess the point is, it all comes down to what you want out of your life. If you want to tap into your creative faculties, if you want to achieve your potential, you're going to have to start asking questions, that's for sure. And by the way, just so you know as well, incredibly, if you look at world statistics, so we have now about 1.1 billion knowledge workers across the world. So these are people who are heavily educated, degree qualified, and in professional jobs. 1.1 billion. According to Deloitte's, the actual number of millionaires on the planet, because I do come back to money because it's one of the variables through which you measure success. The actual number of millionaires across the planet is 16 million out of 8 billion. That's not even 0.2% of the world population. So we have 1 billion knowledge workers, and only 0.2% of the people get to a point at retirement where they don't have to rely on the government or their families. So to me, that's an epic failure. In no other industry would we accept a 99.8% failure rate, but we just accept it like it's normal, and there is no protest, nobody says anything. It's like everybody is so busy being busy, and that's one of the best ways you know that people are indoctrinated is you make them myopic, you make them microscopic so that they don't have a telescopic vision. They don't look, they don't ask, they don't question anything. And fundamentally, that's where society will go wrong, because if you look at the rates of mental illness now, you look at, and I said this is a bit of a depressing part, but if you look at the World Health Organization statistics on mental health, it's the number one cause of disability now. Why? So if we have better lifestyles now, we have better jobs, we're supposedly more educated, why are we so unhappy and why are we so depressed? Part of the reason is we don't know anything about ourselves, right? And so that has a huge impact on us. And then imagine you work 30 or 40 years and I've had some terrible stories. I've had people come and literally say to me, I'm running out of money and I'm going to go to Thailand and I'm going to get some drugs to euthanize myself because I don't have any money and I can't be close to my kids and grandkids and I'm being pushed into retirement. Now, those are not nice conversations to have, but I don't think the average person has any idea what's actually going on. You know what I mean? So for me, it's about bringing it to their attention that, hey, if you want to become an empowered individual making your own choices, you must identify signs of indoctrination. So you've got to realize where you're indoctrinated and then unindoctrinate yourself. And that's why I've put in the first page, that's how you indoctrinate people. There are only 3 steps and they're incredibly simple.
If I'm the average person, right, and I'm hearing this, my first instinct is I want to push back, right? And I want to say, you're overthinking things, conspiracy theorist. You've obviously got an authoritarian complex. You should just stop talking, right? That's usually the response that you get, right? And it makes sense because of the path of humans are designed for the path of least resistance, right? We will always choose the easiest path. And the easiest path is ignorance, They call it the bread and pony show. As long as you give me bread and you give me entertainment, I'm good. And I don't want to know anymore. But is that enough, is the question, right? And that's where we're at now with this book. It's like, yeah, life's okay, right? And this is like, as a psychotherapist, it's like you got people say, well, I don't need therapy, I don't need to see anyone. It's like, yeah, you probably don't, right? But it's like, your life's okay, so why rock the boat? But that means you're sort of settling for a state of being that is just okay, which means you probably figured out what life's about. You probably figured out how to get money. You figured out the whole game. Therefore, you go on for retirement, the postcard finish, all right, and you're good. But the problem is this is the scariest question. So the path of knowledge. Do you go down that path of seeking what could I be? Is there something more to being a human being, right? That's not a comfortable path, which is the idea of spirituality or the spiritual awakening is not this, I'm floating into the clouds and I'm meditating and now life is all good. Spiritual awakening is a catastrophe of knowing that you are way less than what you could be, right? And that's what we're questioning. What am I now and what could I be if I did that, if I asked those questions? Those are scary because in the confrontation with knowledge, you have to be willing to kill off an old version of yourself. That's the premise of new knowledge. If I learn something new, by default, it suggests that I have to kill off an old idea. Not many people want to do that, right? And so we have the average across the whole society that we'll just take the bread and pony show.
I think it goes, has anyone heard of the Maslow hierarchy of needs? Yeah. So have you actually identified that the vast majority of people, once if their physiological needs are met, food, water, sex, next level security, if they got a house and they got a car and they got safe employment, third level needs, social needs are met, I've got some friends, I can hang out with people. At that level, the vast majority choose not to grow anymore. They stop pursuing information. They do not pursue the truth at that point. They don't want to confront reality at that point because it's disturbing, frankly. Why is that an issue? Why should you evolve? Well, I'm not telling anybody you need to evolve, but you need to understand this. You're the perfect puppet for politicians. Generally speaking, and this is where I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist here. Generally speaking, politicians, people who are able to get power and retain power are incredibly high IQ. I'm not saying in terms of their ability to do their job well. They're incredibly high IQ, are extremely well versed with emotional manipulation techniques, and they have a very low, what I call amygdala response. Their fear response is very low, which is why they're able to take these risks. If you don't go past the third stage of evolution, you're going to be the perfect puppet in the hands of marketers and politicians. And you're not even going to know it. You're going to be taking your money, and I've seen it so many times. I've come across people and they helplessly spend money on things. And then they go, I don't know why I do this. Or they have these bad relationships one after another. And they go, I don't know why I always end up in an abusive relationship. They helplessly find themselves stuck in these patterns. I join the gym and I don't go. What is actually happening to this individual is they're programmed to struggle, right? And they are living from the outside in, and they don't even know what's going on. And the therapy can only help so much. Eventually, you've got to come back and you've got to have some self-awareness. Because even therapy by itself, if you have low self-awareness, is not going to help because, again, you're living from the outside in.